Hi, my name is Abby Stein. I'm an out and proud transgender, queer, formerly Orthodox Hassidic Jew.
When you think of New York City, what comes to mind? Is it bright lights and billboards? Crazy fashion? Or guys dressed like Elmo in Times Square? What if I told you that there's a whole nother side to New York City, one that is often left unnoticed? A short walk from Manhattan over the Williamsburg Bridge, south of Hipsterland, is home to the most concentrated Hassidic Jewish community in America. Hassidic Jews moved to this part of Brooklyn around the time of World War II, many escaping harsh living conditions in the Lower East Side, and many of them Holocaust survivors themselves. As a Jewish traveler, I've wanted to visit this neighborhood for decades. Now I'm finally here and I could not be more excited about my guide. I teamed up with Abby Stein, a Williamsburg native who left the Hasidic world behind to live her truth as a transgender woman. Today, she is an author, activist, blogger, model, speaker, and rabbi. And did I mention she's a direct descendant of Hasidic Judaism's founder? After showing me her old stomping grounds, Abby brought me to Borough Park, another Hasidic neighborhood, to sit down and chat and learn from her story.
Everything that I'm sharing is my own personal experience. And I'm not trying to say this is the experience of everyone. I am saying this has been my experience, and that this experience is also the experience in some ways of thousands of other people in the community.
Where are you originally from?
Whenever people ask me where I'm from, I ask them, do you mean culturally or do you mean geographically? Geographically speaking, I was raised in Williamsburg in Brooklyn, New York, more specifically in South Williamsburg, or what I sometimes call Hassidic Williamsburg. Culturally, I think the easiest way to describe it is 18th century Eastern Europe, or more specifically a pretend 18th century Eastern Europe, or to use a more academic term, let's call it a neo-18th century Eastern Europe. It's a new version of it and one that didn't actually exist. The idea that they're thinking of recreating is recreating the Hassidic world from what we would call in Yiddish in der Heim, literally translates to back home, which is very interesting because people will think, oh, like when Jews are talking about back home, they're talking about Israel. Sure. They're talking about 18th, 19th century Eastern Europe. Geographic region we're talking here mostly is where the shtetls were. Now, shtetls are literally just Yiddish for village, but shtetls are also a concept. We're talking about the Pale of Settlement of the Russian Empire, the Hasidic community, and most of my dad's family, and some even of my mom's family, come from parts that are currently in Ukraine. From there, the Hasidic community expanded to Poland. So Poland had the largest Hasidic community before the Holocaust. This community sees that period as a hypothetical religious utopia, or in my maybe not so humble opinion, dystopia, that supposedly existed at that specific point in time. The reality of what they have created never really existed. We can go into a long conversation of how different the Hasidic community today is than the ideals of the Hasidic movement founded by my direct ancestor. Ultimately, the community created a life apart. Their own ideals, trying to create a community that is fully segregated and sheltered from the outside world. Some of the identifying details for me, specifically growing up in Williamsburg, was the lack of English. I grew up in New York City, didn't speak English until I was 20. We didn't have a real education. It's very focused on their idea and their version of family life. Everything is set in stone from a really young age. I tell people, you're born, you eat, you breathe. When a boy turns 3, they have their first haircut. When a boy turns 13, they have a big bar mitzvah. Girls technically become bat mitzvah at the age of 12, but it's not celebrated in any formal way at all. A lot of spaces, community-wide spaces, women are observers as opposed to being fully part of the community. And that is one of the biggest issues that I have with the community throughout my life. And that also culminates with arranged marriages. I'm talking my family and my community. It's fully arranged. We're talking one meeting for half an hour to an hour and you're engaged. It's technically not forced, though very often borders on forced, and I know a lot of specifically women who felt like they had no choice. For the vast majority of Hasidic teenagers, this is the first time you're having a conversation with someone who is being socialized and raised in the opposite gender. Yeah. I'm saying socialized and raised because obviously I think that the very rigid gender roles are also messed up and inaccurate, and that's a whole other conversation on its own.
Let me just transition the conversation a little bit. So when did you come out?
So I started leaving the community. It's a process. You don't wake up one day and you leave. Sure. It is, in many ways, I think the closest thing you can think of is immigration. You are immigrating to a new country. When you leave, you are in a different universe. I went from wearing black and white clothes, literally, not even metaphorically, to walking into Macy's and, for all intents and purposes, having an infinite amount of options. It's overwhelming, specifically when you don't know anything. I couldn't carry a conversation in English when I was 20 and I started the process of leaving, I didn't fully leave until a year later. And by that time, I could speak a better English. So for me, it was a journey. I started leaving the community in 2012.
Well, how did you leave the community?
So compared to maybe other fundamentalist and cult-like communities, there is no formal excommunication process. There's a rabbi. He came down to this place called a kollel, kind of a seminary for married students, which is anyone above 18, 19, and gave a whole speech about how no one should talk to me and how talking to me is dangerous, and that if I walk into synagogue, no one should even kick me out. But that was unique. They usually don't do, like, if you leave, you're gone. There's no in between usually.
When did the
so I knew I was from a really young age, and there's different periods of my life I had different ways of trying to deal with it. Everything from trying to embrace it, to trying to run away from it, to trying to pray it away. As I started leaving, I started learning that there are other people like me. It took over 3 years. So I learned first that trans people exist in January of 2012, which is when I went online for the first time. I started physical transition almost 4 years after that, September of 2015, and then came out November of 2015. It's a lot. And it was a journey, and it was something that I was terrified of at the time.
Sure.
I was the first person who was raised in a Hassidic community in the 250 years of the Hassidic community's existence to have come out publicly.
And how do you feel now walking through the streets as who you are?
In some ways, there's a certain comfort. I am who I am. I can present as who I am. I think most people who don't know me just perceive me as a woman most of the time, and I love that, and I enjoy that.
You're a bestseller, you have an amazing book, you have some potentially exciting films coming out about you.
We have TV shows, we have some stage production stuff.
You're a speaker, you travel all over the world.
I have done over 500 speeches over the past 4 or 5 years.
So what's your goal in all this?
I remember when I came out, my story went viral without me having any input in it, and then I had to kind of like make that decision if I want to lean into it or if I want to fight it. And I had this conversation with my therapist. By the way, you shout out to therapy. Love therapy. Everyone should be in therapy. Because we were talking about, do I want to escape this? Do I want to keep a private life? Do I not want to engage with the publicity part of it? Or at the same time, I knew there was a lot of, like, as I said, I was the first trans people. There have been a dozen people since, and so many more were coming out. Like, I have this opportunity to reach so many people. And I jokingly said I want the Hassidic community to become transphobic. I don't want anyone to be transphobic, but I want the community to recognize that trans people exist. And that I can say I've accomplished, mission accomplished. Most Hassidic people today know that trans people exist. 10 years ago, most Hassidic people had no idea what transgender is.
Abby, what is one message that you want to say to everybody in the world?
I want every person to know that who you are, the sum total of who you are, all of your experiences is not just okay, it is beautiful, it is something that is worthy of celebration, and I know myself and so many other people who will fight for every person's right to fully be who they are, out and proud, and not just tolerate, but celebrate that.
You guys heard it here first. Gay, straight, transgender Jew, or Hasidic rabbi, we are all the same. So let's celebrate and live out loud who we are and who we want to be. Stay tuned for my New York City series on my main channel. You guys don't want to miss Abby taking me all around Brooklyn as we document what life is like in the most reclusive, fundamentalist corner of our country. Thanks for watching.
Yeah, we should have asked AJ how my hair is, but okay.
Your hair looks great. You don't trust me.
I have nothing against straight guys, but you all don't know what you're...